But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Verse 11, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. A couple thoughts. You can't stop a preacher from preaching, but a couple thoughts. I love how Paul sets this up. He starts with, what's the thing that we all have in common? At the most important level, right, we have one Lord, we have one faith, we have one Holy Spirit living in us, we have one salvation through Jesus Christ. At the base level, at the most important level, every believer here is the same. Right? From the oldest to the youngest, newest believer, to the one who's been a believer the longest, Nick, to everybody else in this church. Right? There's no difference. At the same time, then he goes into, but there have been different gifts given. As the Holy Spirit is set up from the beginning of the church, there would be different gifts given. You might think, well, it's starting to diverge, right? Now there's different gifts. But then he says, what is the purpose of those different gifts? The purpose is that everybody can grow together into Jesus Christ. Right? So it doesn't spread out like a tree. The purpose of the different gifts is so that we can all function well together and all grow together into Jesus Christ. So I think that would be a good foundation to think through this evening. So a little bit on schedule. So there's going to be a presentation, about 30 minutes. You have a few of the slides there so that you can take some notes along the way as we go. But you'll see there's only 30 minutes per presentation, and then there's 15 minutes of table discussion. So you're going to discuss with your table. What are kind of your initial feedback? What are the initial thoughts that come out? You'll see there are note cards and pens at your table. Please try to jot down questions, either as the presentation is going or during that discussion time. Questions or comments, right? What makes sense to you? What do you see that and you're like, yes, that's good, that's going to help? And what do you see like, that's confusing, I don't get it, or I don't like that, right? That's concerning. And then we'll have about 40 minutes to go around table by table and share your thoughts and ask questions, and we'll have some Q&A. So that is the plan for this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to start with a prayer. Let's just bow our heads. Father God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this church. This church may have been built with human hands, but we know it exists because of Jesus Christ and his work, and it is his Spirit that has pulled these believers together, and it's because of you that we are here, Father. So we pray your blessing on this. We put it all in your hands, Father. We want all of this church and the working of this church in all things to be submitted to you, submitted to your will, placed before you, Father. Pray for honest feedback from the church that you'd be moving, and where there are questions, we'd be able to answer them. And again, just pray that you'll be with us in this evening. Bless those who are watching the kids, and for their service to us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Chad, and welcome everyone. Greetings. It's good to see you all. I just wanted to start also, before I get into mine too, since Chad went off script, I'm going to do the same. You saw 3 scriptures up there on the first slide, and sometimes I know there are those who think that this is a secular business kind of thing we're doing, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. We feel, and we reference 3 scriptures up there. One is Proverbs 16:9, which basically says, man makes his plans and God directs our steps. I think God expects us to plan to be diligent about what he's given us as resources and to plan, but we trust in him to direct us along the way. And that's our prayer in all of this effort. And then you go through the book of Acts and you see the forming of the church, and you see so often there are things done, resources put in place to meet the needs of the church. And it's best maybe embodied in Acts 6, verses 1 through 6. And then, as Chad referenced Ephesians 4 very well, I'm glad you started with that, because it is an eloquent way that Paul expressed how the body of believers comes together and uses its gifts for his glory. And so this is part of our responsibility to steward the resources we have for this church. God has been so good to us, and we want to do it in a thoughtful, prayerful way, and we need your help. This is our church. And so, as Chad said, we really just want to get your feedback on where we are at this point. So I'm going to start with I'm going to start figuring out how to work this thing, which Blair gave me a tutorial, and I'm not following it very well. All right, I just got it now. Perfect. Okay. So I want to start by just saying there's two basic themes here. One is on shared leadership, and the other one is on the addition of an ordained deacon. And they are inextricably linked. They are very related. So the model in which we aspire to is a shared model, where leadership in our church is shared. And it's very important, because I think we have been on that path from the time we had the Stewardship Committee put in place some 15 years ago. And it's our desire to continue and take that even farther, especially as it relates to your elder, my position. And so it's really important, as we think about the change we're talking about, the addition of an ordained deacon is in the context of the desire to have even a more shared leadership model in our church. Hey, boys. Hey, Brandy. Okay, this is great. So the first thing I want to talk about then is the shared leadership. It's a purposeful sharing of the ministerial responsibilities, not only across the pulpit, but throughout our entire church body. A purposeful sharing of responsibilities. And it's to use the gifts for the building up of the church. It is also keeping in mind a protection of the whole health of the ministry. And this is very important. We have a lay ministry model. And so we have to be watchful that all of us who are engaged in ministry are looking at our whole health: spiritual, familial, vocational, emotional, physical. It's really an important thing to think about, because in a lay model, you can burn people out fast with too much. And we have to watch for that. And that's a key part of what we're putting forth here today. And we want the entire church to walk with us in this change from a past model. And let me just spend a second trying to explain what the past model, or a traditional model in our apostolic church, is. The elder has a significant role, and a lot goes through the elder. I don't know, those of you who have experienced maybe in your home church growing up, it can vary the degree to which that happens, but generally speaking, there is a lot that goes through the elder, a lot of communication, a lot of counseling, decision-making. It's the point of church engagement, and it can get very heavy. And so, frankly, one of the reasons I stepped down in my business role was because I was doing both very poorly in my mind, and I needed more time for the ministry. And I still say today, it is a very heavy load, and it taxes you. I don't have children here in this area. Suzanne and I do not. But we have children scattered across the country, and grandchildren. And it weighs on us. So you can imagine, as we see younger ministers coming up into these roles, raising families in jobs, we really have to be thoughtful. And that's what we mean by needing to move from a traditional model, where so much falls on one position, to a shared model. It's really an important part of this. And that shared model is the pulpit, but it's also the entire church. And we're going to keep that in mind as we go through this, is what I'm asking. And as part of this, it necessitates a culture of volunteerism. And we're going to touch on that tonight. What does that mean, a culture of volunteerism? It's really vital to this being, I think, healthy in terms of how we move forward. So under that model of shared leadership, then we're pursuing to add an ordained deacon for our church. And that is a preparation for succession. for a new elder in 2024. And it's also to help in the meantime with responsibilities that are currently in our church reserved for an ordained position, an elder or an ordained deacon. And those would largely be baptisms and communion. And after this meeting, within the next week or so, you'll be getting some biblical references as well as the process that we're going to follow to pursue putting in place an ordained deacon. So we thought it was really important to talk about these together. And secondly, the minister team that we have, I think under that traditional model would have a hard time stepping into an ordained deacon or an elder role under the old model. Why? Because of the health of their families and the health of total health we talked about. So it's really an important thing to share. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly go through the 5 reasons, 5 drivers, 5 catalysts for why we're doing this now. Those have been shared with you over the pulpit and in an email, so I'll be fairly quick on these. The first one is Suzanne and I have talked about this, prayed about it. We feel called to step down in 2024, probably March. That's 2.5 years. So it is timely to make this transition together, to get the church with us in this succession plan. The church has changed a lot. Most all of us who have been here for a long time, some of you here, you have a handful who started the church. And it's 20 years. Neil shared that with us recently. It's 20 years. And 15 years ago, when we looked at the Stewardship Committee change, when it was put in place, and that's what we're largely looking to reorganize, the Stewardship Committee. 15 years ago, we have 3 times more members, 5 times more children, and 3.5 times more total attendees in our church. So with that came also a change in the demographics of our church. So with all those change, it seemed timely to look at how we organize, how we lead, and how we structure. Third element here is the workload capacity and a healthy ministry. I've touched on that already. It is certainly a strain on a lay leadership model, especially in our apostolic model of the past, to be able to sustain this. And so you see here the pictures of family and of work and of church and of spiritual health. All those things are vitally important as we think about the load and the ministerial health that is there. And so the other ministers asked, I need to capture how much time I spend on what, so that they could look at, well, what does that look like going forward? And so it's roughly in counseling and communication about 20 to 25 hours a week of time. And there are other things around the national church that also pull time, and that can ebb and flow. In my case, I'm pretty active in the national church. I think once they find out somebody's retired from their job, they give them a lot of opportunity to step up. And honestly, it's been a little bit too heavy for me, and I'm trying to cut some things out. The biggest thing for me is to support our missions in Jamaica. And that is that's a blessing to be part of that. So if you think about that time, and you think about somebody else stepping into that time, and looking at all the whole health, it just isn't tenable. So we need to think differently about how we manage our time as a minister team. You might have noticed that we are already beginning to make some changes the last year. Not all of us are going up on the pulpit. It's not the elder that's always giving the announcements. It is really a nice break. I don't know if you brothers think this, to be able to sit with your family at time when you're not up there. And so that's small, but it's what we want to continue in even more meaningful ways in sharing the load. And counseling is the big load on the elder. I'll just tell you, counseling for converts, counseling for individuals, counseling for couples, conflict resolution, it is significant. And so we are looking to find ways to share that more. Another point on this slide that's really important is that for those of you wondering, is West Lafayette out on the edges here? The national church, the elder body just said we need to have a strategic agenda. What are the things that are most, that we should be keeping in front of us most? One of them was what really binds us together as a body of believers, and what should we leave in terms of local congregational latitude? That's one. The other one is this one up here. What is a realistic model of church leadership and administration for the future? For the exact same reasons we're dealing with here. the load, the health of the ministry, and the needs of our church. So this is a national church recognized area of focus. And so we have an opportunity to get support and step into it in that framework. I know that's really important. The number of things that have grown here are significant in the way of things such as outreach, the discipleship, like small groups, the youth activities that come with more youth, with our high schoolers going to college, the activities in PYG. And so there's so many things that have grown here that it's increased the demand on the ministry. And then finally, I've already passed my time. Sorry, fellas. Somebody's going to have to make it up. Finally, then, representation. The Stewardship Committee representation and communication. We want some sisters on the Stewardship Committee. We've been talking about that for years. It's timely to do that. In addition, we have some 15 ministries that aren't represented at all on the Stewardship Committee. So we really want the Stewardship Committee to be a place where all ministries are represented somehow in the church, and that we have a good mix of gender. And certainly we would say the same thing about generation. We have quite a mix of generations here. We want those represented well. And so that's our desire to do that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Kirk, who's going to talk about a few things that I forgot.
Okay, thanks. Yes, we're going to lean into two of these things that Nick's already mentioned. One's volunteerism and one's shared leadership. We see these as significant culture shifts that are going to be necessary for us to step into the places we're planning on going. And so Nick mentioned the lay ministry model. And in some ways, he was honest about some of the challenges of the lay ministry model. At the same time, we think there's lots of benefits for the lay leadership model. And so we think this plan that we're laying out is an attempt to try to maximize that, to maximize the lay ministry model. And it's not to disparage the past. It's not saying it's about where we are today. And Nick set that up really well. And so we're really excited about the possibilities of what this could mean from a leadership level, because we're heading towards these same visions, visions that we've been talking about, bearing one another's burdens. You've heard that, right, over the pulpit a lot lately. Or sharing the one bread. That's the one that came out of the building in the next generation. You heard that during that time, and a body of believers bound together. That's the national church vision. So I don't know which one of those we've picked yet in regards to what is our calling card, but they're all very similar in regards to their heart. And so the goal is to continue to lean into these ministries. And it's not that, oh no, the counseling needs are too big. Let's not expose ourselves to the need for counseling. But the reality is we want to be able to be equipped and ready to lean into them so that we can continue to invite us as a church to address our needs. Our needs as, you bearing my needs and me bearing your needs, and us doing that together. So that's really the vision for this, and we're still really committed to that vision. And so we hope you continue to hear that as we work through this. So the first one is shared leadership. Nick covered it in regards to the ministry really well, and we want to emphasize the fact that this is not just a ministry thing. This is also throughout all the ministries of the church. And so we're defining it as a recognition of the unique leadership gifting throughout the entire body. Number two, it's a confession of a lack of capacity for the traditional model. Nick mentioned it. None of us, as we're looking at stepping into a potential role, all of us are saying, no, we can't do it. And we're not going to. I think we've said it pretty strongly, right? It's helped drive some of this. And so it's a pretty significant fact. Again, not to disparage the traditional model. It's just there's no way that any of us could do it. And shared leadership is about a commitment to all work together. And Chad read that scripture that really captures that the Lord has given the gifts to the church for these functions. And so this is what we're going to be talking about. This church care function is something else we're working on. We're not going to be talking about it tonight. I'm just sharing it with you that it's another piece that we're working on as far as shared leadership and sharing the load. We're talking about it in terms of the leadership team and the Stewardship Committee tonight. The two that are on your right up there is what we're talking about. And the second significant culture shift is volunteerism. And so this is the idea, again, already emphasized in Ephesians 4, that says it's every part doing its work. And so this is a really significant piece that we want to continue to lean into, which is we think for the effective working out of these ministries, for the effective leadership of these ministries, we want to lean into this idea of everyone stepping forward and doing their part. And so it's a practical living out of each part doing its work by the church family, growing and exercising their gifts together. And so we're going to look at just one quick example of that, a significant one though, which is around how do we pick roles for church ministries, Sunday school teachers, Stewardship Committee roles, ushers, all the roles that are in the church. How do we pick them? In the past, you know our traditional process, which has been a nomination process. It starts in January, and we bring in the nominations, and we contact you and say you've been nominated for this role, and then we send it to a church vote. We would like to exhibit this culture shift towards volunteerism by changing that to making all roles that you volunteer for. So what this would look like is come January, we would be sharing with you all the open roles. We need 3 Sunday school teachers. We need 2 ushers. We need a trustee. We need whatever, and you'll see that come out. And then we envision you all at the same time raising your hand, say, "Hey, I want to do this," and then fighting over what role you get to do. Maybe not exactly like that, but that's the idea. Is we want to make the roles volunteer roles. We want to continue to encourage our shared part in those roles, and so. We would work through a process starting in January with defining each open role, people raising their hands saying, "I would like to do this, I would like to do that." The ministry team will then coalesce those, and if there's multiple people qualified for a role, we'll likely send that to a church vote. If it's not, we'll likely nominate them or appoint them to it, and it'll get confirmed by the church or by the Stewardship Committee. We're working on some of those details, but the idea is to promote this idea of volunteerism and the significant shift that this is one of the steps that we would like to take to encourage that as a church. And so we're excited about this in the sense of, again, increasing each of our ownership of these responsibilities. Because who's responsible for all this ministry? We are, right? Not the ministers, right? We are. And that message we want to come through loud and clear. And so I'm going to hand it off to Rustin to walk us through the Stewardship Committee part.
All right, thanks, Kirk. I'm going to talk about the Stewardship Committee and where we've been in our past state and where we are right now and where we want to go, where we propose anyway, and to meet some of these challenges and opportunities that have been talked about already. So, wrong way. All right, so back in 2007, nearly 15 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long. Only probably not many of you have been here that long. But those of you who have been, you recall we started this journey back in 2007. And really it was intended to do much like we are right now, where we want to meet the needs of the ministry, support the ministry, represent the various ministries in the church, and also represent the congregation at large, which is where at-large members come in. And so not a lot has changed in the sense of the past 15 years. The current slide you see now represents who sits on the committee at this point. So we have the ministers, we have the Sunday school superintendent, the PYG president, and with the West Lafayette coordinator, 3 at-large members, which are brothers, and a treasurer and a trustee. And so this model has really worked well over the last several years. It's helped us out a lot. I can say from the ministry, it's been a great support for us and hopefully for those ministries represented. But there are 3 key things here, I think, that it doesn't currently effectively meet. And one of those would be that the current Stewardship Committee is a little more present, focused, a little more, should I say, reactionary based. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, it's not as forward-looking as what we might like it to be going forward. And so that's one thing. And then Nick mentioned about sisters being represented on this. There is no sister representation. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing would be that there's not very many, or there's not all the ministries represented here. And so the next slide is going to illustrate this. You can see on the left where you've got the current ministries on the SC, which is the slide we just showed. There's the 5 or 6 or so there. And then everything to the right, there's a lot of ministries that are not represented. And this slide was compelling for me personally. As we work through this as a ministry team, it's like, whoa, this is a little bit imbalanced, right? And so, or a lot imbalanced. And so the goal of this effort is to really create create a venue where all ministries can have a quote-unquote seat at the table and feel represented, feel visible, have resources, have accountability, and be able to share. And so, go to the next slide here. So the new Stewardship Committee model that we're putting forward here is intended to, number one, help address all the ministries, all the resources, all the operations within the church. And it would do that by providing, as you can see there under number 2, accountability and support as needed. And this group this committee would meet roughly 6 times a year, roughly every other month. And right now, the current SC meets every month, so 12 times a year. So we're kind of pulling back on that a little bit. And then thirdly, already mentioned this, we would like it to be a little more representative of the cross-section of our church, of our demographic, which would include sisters, and maybe some generational that Nick spoke about earlier. And then also forward-looking, so we would be working with each ministry, and really it'd be a chance to think through what things look like 3 months, 6 months, a year out. And then lastly, this is really, again, gets back to the representation of the various ministries, is we would like to include a representative leader of each of the areas of these ministries. And so this next slide is going to illustrate how we attempt to do that. So what you see before you is a virtual Stewardship Committee table, right? And so just for a moment, I'm going to go around the table starting with the elder. So the elder would be the facilitator, is what we're proposing, and or a delegated minister. And then we'd have an at-large brother, an at-large sister, treasurer, secretary. And then you'll see these focus areas right here. And what those are intended to be is those ministries I showed you earlier that were not represented. We would take like ministries and roll them up under a focus area, and each focus area would have its own representative that would be at the table here. And so, for example, under operations, right, you might see, I can see my hand shaking. All right, stay still. Nope, not working. All right. So, for example, like operations might have trustee, and Blair's going to speak to this, but operations would have trustee, treasurer, AV, IT. They would all roll up under that operations group, and there'd be a representative from their group meeting at the table. And so on and so forth for outreach, for discipleship, for youth ministry, for fellowship, for worship. And so that's what we're proposing right now. And so Blair's going to speak on the focus areas. He's going to go into more detail about what those focus areas are and what they represent.
Yeah, I think this is a really critical slide. I think it's in the packets, but like we've talked, it's a shift in how the church gets represented, how the church gets organized, and how we not only address the present, but also think forward to the future, and how those ministries can move forward in healthy, organized ways and in ways that support each other. So this focus area representative is essentially the term for the new Stewardship Committee member, or the primary Stewardship Committee members. You also have the at-large and the secretary and treasurer and whatnot. So what is the focus area? What is the focus area representative, and what's its purpose? What are we trying to do with it? So it's about shared leadership, right? That's been our term, or the term we've used a lot here this evening. So it's about a shared leadership model, ensuring that everything gets represented and has a spot. This is an elected, maybe that's not quite the right word, but it's a leader sitting on the Stewardship Committee, presiding or handling the purview that's underneath them within their specific area, and we'll get into the details of those. And they're responsible for the vision and health of that respective area. We talked about how the Stewardship Committee itself would meet potentially multiple times, or 6 times every other month or so. The thought would maybe be that these focus areas would meet in the off months to handle their business, again, forward-looking, dealing in the present, again, so that we don't try to manage that workload, but do it in a fairly organized way that helps each area have its necessary time and its necessary investment. So these are the 6, just organized in a little bit different view than what the table view would represent. So this next slide gets a little busy, but again, I believe you all have this slide. And so this is how we've tried to organize those ones that on the quite a few slides back, the ones that didn't have a representative spot on the Stewardship Committee, trying to now bring all those now up underneath one of these 6 areas or focus areas, and to have a home. As Rustin was mentioning, you've got outreach, discipleship, fellowship. We'll go into the details of each of these, but a person volunteering, stepping into that shared leadership role of one of these focus areas and the subgroup areas to really handle and be responsible for and to care for that area of the church. So let's go through them slightly, a little bit more detailed. I tried to, on the right, capture from the previous slide what the subgroup areas are that are represented with the focus areas. So outreach, what's that about? It's the care of the spiritual and physical needs of those outside of our church. Outreach, outside the church, makes sense, right? And that would include not only our own community, but also across our denomination, right? You can see their outreach team looking at our community, charity fund that we have, as well as LUM. Operations, so you can see there on the right, those subgroup areas that would roll up underneath there, and that's really about smooth functioning, right? How does our church building operate? What's the infrastructure like? How do we communicate with each other? And so that's what would roll up from an operations perspective. These next 2 are really about spiritual growth, maturity, right? Discipleship and youth ministry, and really the main delineation is about groupings of age, right? The youth ministry is really about those in school still, college age and younger. Discipleship is really primarily geared towards our adult members and those attending the church, so that no one slips through the cracks from a spiritual mentorship and growth-oriented perspective. And so you can see there on the right, by discipleship and youth ministry, what those different subgroup areas would be underneath those 2. And then lastly, the final 2, fellowship and worship. So fellowship is about building and maintaining a sense of community and connectedness within our local body and denomination. So how do we connect with each other and come together? And what is how do we maintain that? How do we maintain that sense of community and connect with one another? And then the worship side is really about the times we gather to worship, Sunday, midweek, and what does it take to go into those days, right? So song leading, ushering, teaching, choir, the times when we get together to worship. I'll let Chad summarize. We've got the handouts for you. So hopefully that wasn't too much content, but it's a critical area that now has underneath its purview areas of responsibility, areas of care, representation on the Stewardship Committee. And so we're excited about what this model may look like. So I'm going to let Chad wrap it up, and then we'll move to discussion time.
Yeah, thanks all. A lot got thrown at you in the last 30 minutes. Kept good on time. Thank you, brothers. So this is to kind of summarize what were some of the big points. And again, you also have some of the slides pulled out so that you can review them. But yes, pursuing an ordained deacon for the church here. This culture of volunteerism and shared leadership. As you think about that, how does that hit you? Do you think that's a culture you could embrace and lean into? The expanded Stewardship Committee, trying to make sure it represents all of the church and all of the ministries in the church. And in particular, these 6 new focus areas, we're calling them, to ensure that all church functions are being intentionally cared for. So it's kind of the summary of the high points of what we talked about. And now really the meeting turns over to you guys in a shared model here. We're looking for feedback. And so there's certainly 2 aspects to this feedback. There is going to be feedback right now that we're going to ask you to give. Some people are slow thinkers. I'm one of those people. I'll think tomorrow. What was the thing I wish I'd said tonight? If you're one of those people, we've got you. Next couple weeks, think about this, pray about it, dream about it, whatever it takes. Bring that feedback to the ministers, please, because we do want to hear it. Again, whenever it comes to your mind, and even if it's after 2 weeks, for sure. But in terms of what we're going to do right now, 15 minutes, talk with the people at your table. If there's not a lot of people at your table, move to another table that has an open spot. Discuss with each other and try to capture, again, on those note cards, questions that you'd like to ask or comments that you would like to make. Because at the end of the 15 minutes, I would ask that you select a kind of representative for your table. Because at the end of the 15 minutes, we'll go around table by table and share some comments, ask questions. We'll spend as much time as we have yet this evening going through that. So, thank you all. I can have your attention up front. So, excellent conversation going on, which is great, but this is your 2-minute warning. So, if you haven't yet, make sure you choose somebody who's going to speak for your table and put together kind of what is your top priority things that you wanted to talk about. All right, thank you for the discussion. I'll say I'm quite excited to hear what has come out of this because there's been a lot of noise in the last 15 minutes, which is great. This is exactly what we wanted, so it's very exciting to see. So not every question will probably be answerable tonight, but again, feel free to share. Feel free to share your questions, and I would say don't worry about hurting somebody's feelings. Again, nobody's married to this. Nobody's identity is tied with any of this. So I'd rather you share your honest feedback now. So with that, I should have thought ahead of time what order I'd go around the tables, but we're going to start right here. So I'd ask you to share, maybe 2 or 3 so that we have time to get around all the tables, and we'll come back if there's time.
All right. So our table had a couple different areas that we kind of highlighted. We wanted a little more clarity, I guess. The first is, I guess, the process that would be used to elect or select focus area reps. Would that be just a selection from amongst the, I guess, the different leaders that roll up to under each focus area? And then the second that we had, I guess maybe, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so the selection process, really that would first off start with volunteering, right? So that wouldn't be just go out and dub a person or even necessarily de facto to one of the subcategory areas. And all that's still up for discussion, but I think first and foremost, it would be someone with a heart for that area, wanting to step in with a level of passion and energy around whatever that focus area is. And yeah, definitely could maybe be someone that's one of the sub-focus area people as well. But yeah, first off, volunteering. And then anything to add to that?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it could be its own position, and it would likely be its own position. But it
Okay.
also could be somebody from below as well. But the default would be that it would be its own standalone position.
Okay. And then the second question we had was just around, I guess, the volunteer process. Like, I guess just hypothetically, if there's a situation where there's either a lack of volunteers or maybe too many volunteers for a position, what does that kind of look like as far as working through that?
Thank you for volunteering.
Thanks, Phil. And then could we have some type of a hybrid process with volunteerism and also like a nomination process for positions?
I guess that was my slide, so I'll talk about it. So we, instead of the nomination process, we're going to start using the word nudge. So, and that's where us as a church family look and see each other's gifts, right? There's certain people that just, we have a certain reticence to step forward just because of we're not confident or we're not yet, we're still sorting out our gifts in some ways. But somebody else sees those gifts in you and they come up and they say, hey, I really think you should volunteer. Not dissimilar from what Phil just did, which is like, hey, it'd probably be good if you went ahead and volunteered. So as far as too few volunteers, we picture encouraging the church family to nudge each other instead of nominate. And so at this point, again, all of this is a little bit in flux. We've kind of used the word pilot a few times. At this point, we're not envisioning a hybrid process coming out of that. We envision really pushing into nudging instead of nominating, and then encouraging, at the end of that should be somebody with their hand raised. And so that could come in a number of different fashions. In regards to too many volunteers, we have worked through a number of scenarios. We've talked through them at length in regards to certain different roles. It's a challenging process. Some of them are going to end up in voting, unquestionably. So again, those roles that have to do with kids or money, they will likely end up in voting. Like as we broke them down, if it involves kids or money, you will likely be voting about it because the church needs their say in that in different ways. If it doesn't involve kids or money, then we've really been debating a lot about what that process could look like. But there will always be a confirmation vote on some level on every position, either a confirmation vote by the church or a confirmation vote by the Stewardship Committee.
Thank you. Next table.
Thanks, Chad. All right, so just a couple comments on what's positive about volunteering. So I think the opportunity to step into something that either somebody has nudged you into or that you feel like, hey, this is the opportunity to plug in, it creates a lot of buy-in from the get-go versus being nominated and possibly even put in a position where it's not your gift or so forth. So I think it's a positive to comment. So some questions that we had regarding the Stewardship Committee focus area groups. One was kind of a comment on like the Discipleship subcommittee here. There's quite a few different ministries that involve, I mean, it's a lot there. And so it's just more of a question of maybe if there would be more than one to help cover that, or maybe if it's just facilitating, maybe it wouldn't require more than one. So just kind of how that would look would be the question.
I don't know if we've necessarily landed on what all the possibilities are there. We definitely recognize that's probably one of the biggest areas and has, like you said, a lot of ministries tied up underneath of it. So, yeah, I think multiple people could be on the table, but as you mentioned, they're a facilitator of those areas and help make sure resources are there. So, depending on the person, depending on the year, yeah, there's a lot to be determined there. But that is definitely probably the largest area, just from and youth ministry as well, but just as much things as potentially roll up underneath that one. So, yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. That can be fleshed out. So this is a really random question, but I was just curious, under youth ministry, youth and young group, what is it referring to? I know we've used it interchangeably for single.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, young group hasn't really existed too much in the last several years just because we haven't had many converts fall in between the the, under senior high school age. And so, can you hear me? Okay, I'll just hold it closer. So young group is really intended to represent those who are converted, high school age and younger, basically. But anybody who has an interest to attend those events or attend those young group ministries or events or whatever is certainly welcome to attend. And then youth ministries is more across the spectrum of Sunday school, all ages, unconverted, converted. And so that's the distinction, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I was curious what other EC churches are doing in this regard. I've been in several different ones that not involved as much in the nomination process. So as far as I know, that's always been the way it's been done. You kind of alluded to whether we may be on the fringes or like kind of pushing. I'm just curious what other churches have done.
Yeah, so with regard to other apostolic Christian churches in this regard, there's a lot going on right now. Probably Indianapolis is putting in a new leadership structure in place now. They're rolling that out. And just as a sidebar, when we were in Phoenix, there wasn't a nomination process. You volunteered or you were encouraged for Sunday school, for example. So I think it's quite there's more variety and difference across our church denominations than you might imagine. One thing I will tell you is that the number of elders who are struggling emotionally and mentally has increased dramatically. And so that's something I forgot to mention earlier. So regarding that part of the presentation, it's a real thing. And so this kind of thing of spreading the load and doing it not just on the pulpit, but in the church is getting a lot of momentum right now. And as Kirk said, there's a lot of really positives of that regarding the engagement of your church body in doing church.
Thanks, Nick. Anything else?
Our thoughts had to do with, does the current plan do enough to relieve the elder burden? We have three kind of questions, and they all kind of go together. Is there thought to having the elder and the ordained deacon as a permanent thing? It sounds like we're going to do that, and then the ordained deacon would become the elder, but then would we backfill with another ordained deacon? And the way that the trajectory is now, does our current ministers feel like then they might be willing to step into the eldership role, because you said that you're not kind of in the way that it is now. So are we doing enough to offload some of the burden off the elder?
Those are great questions, and I think we've kind of wrestled through those. One is what you've seen tonight is not quite the full picture of that part, that we are talking amongst ourselves of like my time, what I spend it on, and how do we distribute that across the minister body. And so one thing I would say, and I said it, how long you guys been preaching, Chad and Blair? I said it at the beginning that we're probably going to be needing to look for more ministers soon, okay? And this is one of the things that we were envisioning, the need for this help. So we are intentionally looking at that time, and then we're going to need your help as a church as we communicate that to follow that, as opposed to the muscle memory of, oh, I should call the elder, right? So there's some work to be done there. And I think in that scenario, I believe I can speak for you that these brothers are willing to step into that role. Now, you mentioned something we would like to see, which is more ordained positions in our church. We're not there yet nationally, so we don't want to get ahead of that, but we could envision more ordained positions, or all the ministers being ordained positions. So for things like communion and baptism, it's wonderful to have your local ministers participate in that, who know the converts, who know our people. We've done it a few times, and it's like, wow. So I think that's the direction we'd like to hit. I forgot the third question.
Well, like, can the elder position and the ordained deacon become permanent when we have both, we have two positions going
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
And that's a way possibly to
It
share
is.
that.
It is a really good idea, I think, about getting more towards that. Yeah, well, they do, and I think that could easily be something we would do in 2.5 years. And there was a question, should we not just go for a co-elder now? But I did ask that question to our elder committee, and I think they would have maybe given that autonomy, but there's a long enough gap between my current plan to step down that it might be kind of awkward. But to your point, having a more patterned elder ordained deacon has some really it has some merit.
Can you speak a little more towards relieving the burden as it relates to counseling? Because it seems like that's where a lot of the burden lies.
Yeah, I think probably it is just being clear about, well, there's one of two ways to look at it. I mean, the intake could come to me and then quickly could distribute that. Or we could inform the church, here are the brothers to go to for counseling. And it gets kind of complicated because there's converts, there's individuals with unique needs, and there's couples. So we're still working through how best to do that. Without just being thoughtful. And it could be that the giftings up here are more with a certain group. Like maybe there's a certain brother who has more experience in couples counseling and one more with converts. So, but we're not really sure yet. But we're going to get that figured out because it's a key part to your first question. Anything you guys want to add to that?
I would just say that is what that other yellow circle was. Church care is that piece, and so we do have some initial brainstorms started on that we've been throwing around.
Before Alyssa speaks, I just want to say thank you, Alyssa, for your administrative help this evening and also taking notes. Oh, and also, you may have noticed Neil's not sitting up here. There's not a feud going on or anything. Neil was willing to fall on the sword when the PYG couldn't come to watch kids, and he and Chris are helping watch kids. So if you see him, tell him thank you.
I agree.
All right, our first question here, don't read into what we're not saying. Don't read into what we're not saying. This is not a dig. Does the person voted into the deacon position need to be a current minister?
Yes. It's possible not, but I mean, I've heard this before years ago, but it would make, I'm going to be kind of blunt. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. I mean, these ministers have been voted in, and to have someone that's not been yet voted in as a minister to be an ordained deacon, yeah. Well, I should have just said no.
And this is just something more to consider about maybe helping people understand their giftings better so we have a better volunteer basis. I know the nudging can be helpful. That was good wording, but just where our thoughts were with the volunteering process.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, great question so far. So the couple that haven't been answered that we had is, what's the time frame of these roles when you volunteer and get put into them?
So most of the current roles will continue as they have been, meaning some have terms, some don't, and some of those may need some realignment. We've just thrown out the idea of the focus area leaders being a 3-year term with being able to do it twice, so a potential 6-year service. So that's the only thing that would change in this new model is the focus area leader. And what? Timing of when this would start? Oh, January of 2022. So we would hope, again, when that's kind of being somewhat slightly presumptuous. If you guys don't support it at all, then we'll be back at the drawing table. Nope. We'll be doing it just like every other year, which is some will be open, some won't, just based on the turnover and the churn.
And all those sub areas, there's many of you already involved in one way or another in those, right? And so it's not a wipe the slate clean 2022, all hands on deck, let's figure this out. I mean, there's a lot of investment going on in a lot of those areas already. So.
Yeah, and then the other thing we had is looking at all these subgroups, like if you're talking about nudging or putting people in, we were like, some of these don't seem to have leaders currently on some of the subgroups, and then you're finding leaders for the overarching. So is there a process of making sure all those get filled in, or do some of those fall off, or how does that look?
There's a lot of change happening here at the beginning of 2022. And so we want to take care of the main roles first, and those other ones are really important. There's no men's ministry coordinator right now. We'd love to see that happen. But at the same time, if that doesn't naturally get filled, it's going to be some discussion with the discipleship focus area leader, kind of where they're at in that, and allow them a little bit of space to help kind of bring some of that on. So again, there's going to be some of those pieces that we're not going to try to force all of those to be full in January 2022, just based on the amount of change we're currently working through.
So a couple of the questions that we had as seeing the list under these focus groups is, when you have that representative that gets to the Stewardship Committee, someone is basically speaking on behalf of other areas. And so they get together in the off month or whatever, and they talk through these things, but as soon as they get there to the meeting, all of a sudden they're answering questions on someone else's area that someone else is really pouring into, but all of a sudden someone's talking about something that they may not kind of know the details, and so then they are representing that, but then they're also, I guess, going back to that group, and it kind of seems a little bit like Chinese telephone as far as the real point might get lost a little bit in there. And I know now with stewardship, we always say, speak to an at-large member or a minister's leading up. So I feel like there's opportunities for things to be addressed, even if your ministry is not currently have a seat at the table, I guess. But just how you would kind of iron out some of those details in ways that it's not, otherwise you get to the stewardship and it's basically a report on all these other ministries, and it seems like it wouldn't be as productive if you didn't have that detail there.
Yeah, so I'll take it, I guess. In those other scenarios, go to your minister, to go to the stewardship committee, the minister is going to end up holding that too much. Too much is going to end up going through them. So that ends up being, that's what it is, one of the things we're trying to mitigate against. And so it is go to that focus area leader. The reality is, I think we can say this really loud, which is the fact that focus area leader is a really big job and a really big deal. Meaning that the risks that you mentioned, I think, are very real. And obviously we're going to check it out over time, but it's just a really big job. And that is going to be their responsibility to navigate that from a communication perspective, which is going to mean that those people who volunteer for that role, we anticipate being very good communicators.
I was just going to say that. Yep. Yes. Yep. Grant just took the words out of my mouth. So that's exactly right. No, actually, that's something we kicked around internally. Was it wouldn't always have to be the focus group rep that goes to the SC meetings. It could be another person, say it's another subgroup leader who's got something they really want to share or run by that they feel that they can communicate the best. And so they could attend, right? I think that's what you're getting at, right? And so it'd be appropriate for them to do that. It wouldn't always have to be the rep, the focus area rep. So, great question. Yep. And I think it is going to be kind of a work in progress, as those representatives learn their groups and understand and work with them, they are going to become very intimately aware of what's going on in those ministries. And so that's sort of the highlights the importance of that position. Brad.
So with that, in those different areas, is there, I guess, leeway for many of those to kind of be making decisions for their group in those off times? Or is it kind of the lag of, okay, wait till the next SC meeting to run this by and kind of wait for approval or?
Yeah, great question, Brad. I think the intent is for these leaders and these groups to have a level of autonomy that they can make decisions and that they do feel empowered to be able to make those, make decisions and not it always coming to the ministers or the elder for that matter. So I think it probably goes along the lines of what some of those decisions are sometimes, and so we might have to exercise some discretion in terms of where that line is, what goes to the SC, what doesn't. But we do want to empower these groups and give them some level of autonomy to be able to make decisions.
And I think that's one of the critical pieces of those focus area reps being forward-looking, is that instead of it being a reactionary thing that, oh no, I got to wait 2 months for this decision to get made, that there's some responsibility there for, hey, what's the course of the next 2 months, 6 months, year that we're dealing with stuff, and then bringing those at the right time to the Stewardship Committee so that there's good oversight in those things that they maybe need counsel on or need help in making a decision, but that's where some forward perspective is gonna need to reside there as well.
All right. Oh, wow, that popped. All right. So I will start going down the list with what was positive. So one thing that we found really positive, we're excited about, was the encouragement or the cultivation of volunteerism. I think that is going to be, or I and everyone else. Sorry, I'm speaking from first person. Think it's a very good thing to be plugged into the church, to have that be coming from the body itself will definitely help ministries to thrive and grow on. And one of the things that we particularly liked was the nudging concept, as you've used the term. I think it'll be good for us to, help get some things, whether people are confident or they're, just trying to lay low or may not recognize that. I think that will help foster that volunteerism. Another thing we thought was, where's my list? Oh yeah, that it's a good place with encouraging volunteerism to check our hearts. Is this something that we think is important? Is this something that we think is valuable for our church? And that will kind of, whether people volunteer for something or if they don't, that will kind of filter through, like what do we deem as the essentials? Like some people vote with their wallets for different businesses. Like this would be something that we vote with our time. What do we feel that as a church is important to invest our time and our efforts into? And so that could help filter through some of these committees or different areas, because you can spread yourself too thin, but also you can also find out what is really important for this church and what we feel is our skill sets. So then going down list, if I remember correctly, was concerns. Some of the things that have already been talked about, but I'm just going to echo them to let you guys know that this is something we also were considering. Was like the term limits thing. Is it going to be like however long the person feels like they want to do it? If they're really jiving with this, is really meshing, they can stick for 12 years, or if it's going to be something like Sunday school where it's already established with 2 years. The intensity of those areas, I appreciate the honesty and forthcoming of like, no, this is going to be hard. This is going to be a good effort that's going to be required for this. And then answering who does the nudging, and that being from everyone in the body. I think that's also key. One thing that hasn't been brought up yet, so this is a question now. So for volunteering for the social committee, or stewardship committee, so you mentioned trying to get more women into the leadership positions. Do you have any ideas as to like some strategies? I mean, it doesn't have to be a flip on January 22, automatically, bam, everyone, now we're designating women, men, kind of a thing. But like, what is your idea for like how to either bring them in to those positions, or like to incorporate them or transition over?
I think that's the reason for the at-large, but also we're really in the process of discussing now, do we think certain of those focus areas should be women? We'd rather not do that because there could be women that are capable in many other areas, and we don't want to be so presumptuous to say, well, this is going to be a woman. So we're working our way through that. So as it's not like a plug-in, it is truly speaking to the gifts that we have. And so we don't have an answer to that beyond the at-large, but we would take any thoughts on how to make that genuine and not like a, okay, check the box thing, because that's not our intention. We want our gifts, which span both genders in a great way, to be played out in the leadership of our church. Yep.
I'm going to jump in with a comment. Yeah, and I think to that end, obviously, if assuming the church approves of this and likes this idea and we go ahead with it, it's not too early to start thinking about, I'm looking especially at you sisters, it's not too early to start thinking about what areas in the church or what focus areas do I have a passion about? Because I think that's ultimately the solution. As Nick said, we don't want to assign like this focus area leader has to be a sister, right? What we do want is to nudge sisters and brothers, both, but probably especially the sisters, because traditionally, maybe they haven't thought that they could fill those roles, or the church has not looked at them to fill those roles. But there's no reason not to. So.
One more question was with cultivating this culture of volunteerism, how stringent are we on, like, I'm trying to think of the right term, like organic, like growing of like a new, I don't know, outreach effort, or like if someone wants to start like a men's choir or whatever, like how much does it need to go through the bureaucratic like system and tier or whatever? Or can it be like something like, I have a heart for this, and we're like, cool, off to the races, and you can go about and, start up something new from the get-go, like a grassroots type thing?
Yeah, we don't know how that's going to work. It'll start with your focus area leader of that part, and I don't know. We don't know. Yeah. I mean, we reacted when you used the word bureaucratic, because that's not what we want this to look like, and so that's not the goal. But at the same time, we have no idea.
So I feel like we spent the majority of our time discussing about our church being welcoming. And so it's not really a question, but it's something maybe just to think about long term, is how we can all be very welcoming to people who maybe aren't familiar with this church. We have a lot of relatives and family here. And so it's not really a question, but it's just something we wanted to emphasize. We use the term onboarding. It's kind of a businessy term, but it's just being welcoming as a body of believers. So that was something we talked about. And then another thing too, this is some encouragement for the church leadership, and that is this idea of volunteerism. It's not really new to us. This tonight has not been a surprise. So the talking points tonight have been kind of reinforcing what we already knew. So well done and appreciated. And then I think the big concern we had, which has already been talked about here, was we've talked a lot about it, but how do you execute it? And we use the term nudging, and we use the term encourage one another. Kirk, I think you were you said nudging, and it's how can we actually make that happen? So that might be a concern for our table here, and that's pretty much it.
I was going to address the first one. You can address the third. On the first one, we think that's a really significant piece. So what we heard you say was, and again, I know it's beyond what you said, but it's been such a focus of ours that we want to make sure this is heard, which is the fact that we don't expect somebody, just because they have the gifting, to be perfect at what they're doing. And so we understand the fact that people are going to step into roles that will still need help developing themselves, being developed into that role to be able to do it effectively, meaning us coming alongside of them. So we've been using the term receiving, meaning if people are going to be volunteering, we also have to be a church that's ready and willing to receive them as they volunteer, even if, because none of us are perfect, right? We all step into roles and we all wish we could give better sermons or whatever the task is. And so that's a really significant piece as far as onboarding and welcoming.
One thing I wanted to share with you on volunteerism, Austin, and for your table and everyone is we realize that we need to lean into volunteerism. Thank you for the encouragement. I think that people, especially people that aren't necessarily from our apostolic church, see us as an engaged church, willing to roll the sleeves up and help. And you see it all the time. It's really a wonderful thing to be part of that. And so we have a lot to be thankful for and a very positive place to start from. What we'd like to see is more people volunteering for positions and feeling it's not, oh, I think I can do this better than anybody else. It's more like, I feel moved to this, oh, great. And so we think we're going to end up, as a ministry team, maybe having teaching on this in the next 6 months. And maybe that second service would be on, what does the Bible tell us about this thing? And what are the attitudes and the approaches to take to encourage us? The best place to go for help in that is the Word of God. And so we're kind of committed to looking into that for the reasons you mentioned.
We'll start with the positives first back here too. So we said things that we think will be really positive would be that we hopefully are pulling in people maybe who aren't currently serving in a role who would maybe like to, or maybe just haven't felt some of the things we've already touched on, but haven't felt confident enough to do that. So we're excited about that, excited about seeing more people in church engage in new roles. We had some questions on terms. Those have all been answered. As far as any other questions that we had, just making sure that that we do have volunteers. I think that's what we're doing tonight is encouraging people, but we're saying sometimes we look around right now and there are existing programs that we have in ministries where it seems like we're encouraging volunteerism and we're not seeing it yet. And so that was a concern we had, just to make sure that that we do see an increase in volunteering. We know that that's needed. And then just that will also, by doing this volunteer approach, hopefully we will have people in roles maybe that haven't, just like historically, they haven't been a certain age group. For example, in Sunday school, we have very few Sunday school teachers right now over the age of 50 back there. So we would love to see some more of the older generation participating in Sunday school. So we hope to see some things like that happen from this. Everything good? That's all we had. Thanks.
Thank you.
I don't think that by the time it's made it to here, I think all of our questions have been answered. So I think the one thing that we kind of had some of the same discussions about the focus areas and how those people are selected or volunteered and then terms as well. And we discussed the deacon position a little bit, and we were kind of the assumption that the deacon would go, that person would then be the elder at one point. And then we also, the question was brought up about Neil. We didn't know if he was, what his timeline was on retiring, and assuming that he would not necessarily be a deacon option, or didn't know if anyone wanted to comment on that.
I can comment on that. I really wish Neil were here, because we just talked about this. I would like Neil to be able to express himself to the church. I really don't want to go there right now, but it's a really sweet position. You know, he's been, I think we can say this, maybe better that he's not here. He's been instrumental and just a wonderful, like willing to take his family here when the church started. And I can just tell you personally, I am indebted to Neil and his help and willingness to check me. he's been wonderful for our church, and so I would rather have him express his heart about where he's going, what his thinking is regarding this. And yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. He is definitely going to be wanting to do that, and I'd rather have him do it. But I just want to acknowledge what everybody knows. The impact that his family and that he has had as a leader here is immeasurable. And, it's 20 years. And a lot can go back to those formative years that started this church here in West Lafayette.
Sorry. Yeah, no, thanks. Actually, the timing worked out really well again, so no credit on that. Thanks for those comments and the thought behind them. It's really appreciated. Like, my greatest fear is you show up and you put this out there and nobody has much to say, and that fear was not valid. So, again, appreciate the input, and kind of, again, please, this is not the end tonight. So if you have a thought tonight or tomorrow or next week, please share it with anybody, any of the ministers. We all forward it on to each other. So just email it to any of us, and it will get shared with the whole group. And we have not talked a lot about next steps, but certainly, after we've collected that feedback and processed through some of it, you should be expecting to hear more.
So I think to close, we can do this as a prayer. Why don't we just sing doxology maybe twice? Yeah, if we can stand up, that'd be awesome. Praise God from whom all blessings flow.
That's nice. Thanks, everybody, again. If you had a question that you didn't get, or a comment that you didn't get a chance to ask, if you could write it down on a note card and give it to one of the ministers, or maybe into Alyssa, we'll make sure that those also get collected and added in the feedback. Thank you.
First opportunity to lean in on this volunteerism. We need some sweeping, some chair arranging, pick up some trashing. Thank you.